everyone, today I have my hands on the new Sony 16-25mm f2.8 G lens, and we're going to be testing this lens out for both photo and video in the field, so let's go. This is a very small and lightweight lens at 409 grams. In comparison to other lenses in a similar focal range, you have the 16-35 f2.8 GM2, which weighs 547 grams, the 16-35 f4 Power Zoom G at 353 grams, the Tamron 20-40 f2.8 at 365 grams, and the 12-24mm f4G at 560 grams. This lens doesn't have the biggest focal range, which we will be seeing a little bit later on, but it does fill in a nice gap in lenses currently available for E-mount. While the 24-50 f2.8G, which I reviewed a month ago, does have a lot of competition in comparison to its focal range and price point, there are not a whole lot of options when it comes to this wider zoom focal range, especially at an aperture of f2.8. So let's take a look at the build of this lens. The 16-25 has external zoom, features a zoom ring, a focus ring, and an aperture ring. There is an aperture click switch and the ability to set the aperture to auto. This lens also has a focus mode switch and a focus hold button. There's not a lot to say here. The build of this lens is great, and I like that they add some of these features like the focus hold button and the aperture ring to their G series of lenses rather than only saving those things for the GM line. Also, of course, the size of this lens is really impressive. The 67mm filter thread is also nice to see, as well as the weather sealing. This lens looks like it's really aimed at compact cameras like the A7C line or for gimbal users. Since I can see this lens being used quite equally between photo and video, I'm going to be sharing a mixture of the photo and video samples I've taken with this lens throughout the video, rather than saving all the video shots for the end. So let's get into performance. Just like the 24-50, this lens also features linear motors for its focus system, and I found it performed really well out on location. Focusing was fast, easy, and accurate. Again, this lens is up to par with Sony's usual quality of autofocus. I had the same performance reflected in video as well. As you can see from these shots, even when moving around, covering and uncovering my face, autofocus was really sticky and snappy, which is great to see. In video, it seemed to have no issues also keeping focus while zooming in and out. I'm not gonna lie, one of the first things I thought about and was worried with this lens after using the 24-50 is the vignetting and distortion. On the 24-50, the wider end of the lens had some pretty heavy shadows in the corners of the frame and very distorted lines with the files straight out of camera. However, I have to say I am pleasantly surprised with the wide angle image quality of this 16-25. We have a lot of straight lines here, so I'm going to test out the distortion on the wider ends of the lens. So let's start here at 25mm and I'll zoom all the way out to 16. So I'm making sure to keep that line right at the bottom of the frame so we can see if there's any distortion. I'm not seeing any heavy vignetting either, which is good. There is definitely some warping happening on the widest end of the lens, but honestly, I don't think it's that bad considering how wide this focal length is. At 25mm, the lines in the image appear straight, and I'm also happy there is no heavy vignette that I could find at any focal length. I'm not used to shooting with such a wide lens. I'm like constantly zooming in and it hits 25. The images this lens produces are nice and sharp, which is great for landscape photography. And while I don't see this as a portrait lens, when you are traveling, sometimes you do want to get some photos of your family or of yourself, and you can definitely achieve some good results with this zoom. The colors here are so nice. You know, I thought it would be a little bit too early for autumn colors, but we've actually got some really nice oranges happening right now. Zooming into some of these shots I've taken, you can see nice crisp details, especially in situations where we have a lot going on in the frame. This would be a good spot to see if we have any chromatic aberration. So we've got the light reflecting on the water just there.
You're like, I need preference.
I really do. I struggle without a subject. That's actually a really nice spot there because you've got the lights really nice and backlit and you've got all those autumn trees behind you. That looks so good. I think I'm gonna ask you to put your camera down so I can get some portraits of you. Starting off with a full body shot here. That looks cool. I love all the colors. It's so pretty. And I'm gonna get closer. I'm just shooting at 16mm to start off with. And autofocus seems to be really good. IF is snappy. And I want to get some kind of close-up portraits on 25. Oh, of course, there's a massive cloud now. It's hard to get some depth of field here because I have to be super close up, maybe like that, to get that depth of field in the shot. But I guess that's good because this lens would mostly be used for travel anyway, so you don't want your background to be fully blurred out. In saying that, you can still get some depth of field with this lens. For example, in these shots here where I'm capturing a close-up of Dan at 25mm, you can see that even his shirt and hair are starting to get thrown out of focus a little. The bokeh from this lens is nice and clean, although I did unfortunately have to shoot these with a slightly higher ISO since we had so many rolling clouds on the day and it got quite dark even though it was quite early. This lens has 11 circular aperture blades. This 16-25 has a minimum focus distance of 18 centimeters on the widest end and 24 centimeters on the long end in autofocus. I'm going to try and get in as close as I can on both the wide and the zoomed in end. I captured some of these images of this flower with focus on those smaller orange petals to take a closer look at the minimum focus details. This lens has a pretty significant lens flare. In some of the backlit shots I captured of Dan where the sun was very strong, you can see lots of defined rings in a few different colors and some defined ghosting as well. I find these flares look very distracting, and because there are so many of them, it would be pretty difficult to remove them in post. In other scenarios where the lighting is not as strong, you still have this chain of lens flares, which is a typical characteristic you see from wide-angle zoom lenses, but they are much more minimal and easier to work with. These, for example, I don't think are distracting much from the shot, especially since they're right off to the side of the frame. I did mention earlier that this lens has quite a short focal range. For some users, this is going to be a non-issue, but since I can see this being a popular lens amongst travelers, this is something I did want to bring up. I'm going to get a shot of Dan at every single focal length of this lens so we can see the focal range, and we're both going to be standing in the same spot. So I'll start on the wide end at 16mm. I'm going to do that one more time, but this time I'm going to move around so I fill the frame and every photo looks the same. So we'll start off on the wide end again at 16mm. If you're after a versatile lens for traveling, I did constantly feel like I wanted to zoom in a little bit more than 25mm while using this lens. Whoa, this is really hard to stand on because it's like tilted backwards. Even though I like shooting with wide-angle lenses, for example, I tend to use a 35mm for portrait photography quite a lot, sometimes even a 24mm. This could also be a personal thing that I'm just not used to using a lens as wide as this 16-25 for landscape and lifestyle shots. So just saying, this is a personal opinion, but the last 10mm missing on this lens makes a big difference to me. I do own the 16-35 GM2, and for me, the ability to zoom to 35mm makes the size and weight worth it. If you're someone who is after the smallest and lightest wide-angle zoom lens, then the last 10mm might not be so important to you, or you have a different lens altogether to cover that. I do also have the 16-35 f2.8 GM2 lens with me, so I'm going to take a portrait of Dan here to compare both of these lenses. This one fits in my pocket. Okay, can I get you there, please? To be fair, this one fits in my pocket even easier. I can see a tiny touch more clarity in the 16-35 photos. The 16-25 also has a little bit of harshness to the sharpness when it comes to skin texture, but overall they are incredibly similar, and in these particular lighting scenarios where the lighting is flatter, it would be almost impossible to tell them apart. The light looks so good. I'm getting a landscape comparison with the 16-35 here as well. When I switch between the 16-25 and the 16-35 GM2, you can definitely feel the weight difference. This one's like air. In this shot here is where you can see the clarity of the GM2 cutting through more than the G. It's hard to see in a video like this, so I'll have a couple of these landscape shots available to download on my blog if you want to take a closer look for yourself. I could do an entire video really comparing both these zoom lenses, so let me know if you'd like to see that in the comments and I can work on it. When both Dan and I are standing in the same spot, this is the focal length difference between 25 and 35mm, so just something to keep in mind depending on your style of work and what you want out of a lens like this. Last but not least, I have a vlogging test to share with you as well. So I've switched over to the A9 III now, and I'm currently vlogging on the 16-25, and I'm on the wider 16mm end, and I'll just walk a little bit so you can see what that footage looks like. I do have the camera on a gimbal, because when I do lens reviews, I use them on a gimbal so we don't take into account like IBIS from the camera and things like that. And I'm also going to zoom into 25, and it stayed nicely balanced on the gimbal too, which is nice. So I'll do some zooming on the gimbal. So here we are at 25mm, and I'll zoom back out to 16. And now I've zoomed into 25mm, and I'll just do a little bit of walking so you can get a feel for what that footage looks like. 25mm. That is all I have for today's video about this lens. I hope you found that helpful, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments. But thank you so much for watching. I make new videos every single week, so I'll see you next time. Bye.